Hello there. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about life in post-war Sarajevo. Being post-war, I have to compare it with what it was like during the war. And so I will tell you that there are both highs and lows during the war and after the war. Nothing is ever perfect and nothing ever goes back to the way it was. And that's just the way of life. So let's start with accommodation and what people did for accommodation. At the end of the war, this apartment block, as you can see, is very badly damaged. It's been smashed up at the end. There are other shell holes and sniper bullet holes that you can't see. And after reconstruction, it looks good again. My first night in Sarajevo, I arrived late in the afternoon or early evening, and I was taken straight to the UN headquarters in the residency, briefed by the rest of the team in civil affairs about various things. And I was asked at some point, maybe about 8 o'clock at night, where had I organized any accommodation, where was I going to stay? And I looked blankly at them and said, you guys have just picked me up from the airport. I've never been here before. How on earth would I know where I was going to stay? So one of them said, oh, fine, you can come back to my apartment, grab your kit, let's go. And we walked through blacked out Sarajevo with the smashed up streets and lots of apartments and buildings looking like this one on the left. And we got to an apartment block, which, although it was shot up at one end, was not shot up at the other end. And my colleague had an apartment on the 7th floor at the other end. And we went up the darkened steps, but of course had our flashlights because we knew we had to take flashlights. And we got to his apartment and we went in and he put on a little color gas light that he had in there. And I put down my bags in the spare room, and I really hadn't even had a chance to go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom and relieved myself and flushed the toilet. That was Sarajevo mistake number one. There was no running water. The running water came to standpipes in the street. No building was hooked up to running water. So he said, well done, there's a bucket beside the toilet. Where you go, fill it, bring it back up, and that's how we'll fill up the cistern, and that's how we'll flush the toilet next time. So I went down 7 flights of dark steps with my flashlight, filled up the bucket and came up 7 flights of steps with the full bucket of water. Trust me, I never flushed a toilet other than on a ground floor for the rest of my time in Sarajevo. And that's the kind of thing that you don't really think about until you actually have to do it. And the whole city was like that. So that was that part of it. The next part, on the left on this picture, you can see some smashed up trams, and on the right you can see what it's like today with the trams back running again. The trams are famous in Sarajevo. The closest analogy I could make would be the blood circulating in your body. At some point the trams stopped, the heart stopped. Very quickly after the war, the trams were got going again, even the battered old rolling stock. Eventually new rolling stock came in. But the day they announced that the loop of the trams from out at the tram station, up down into the town, around Bashchashir, the old town, and back out, that was established again, it really felt as though Sarajevo had come back to life, that the blood was flowing through the system again, and that things could get better. And the important word there is not better, but things. You can mend things, you can mend infrastructure, but you can't mend people. So, what were the post-war lows? How could there be lows after such terrible fighting? Well, the answer is there was. And one of the ones that I wasn't expecting happened very soon to me. I, of course, had got to know some local people quite well, and I was approached as a, quote, rich international, and compared to them, I guess we were rich. And I was asked if I wanted to buy a property. And it happened to be an apartment in Old Town Dubrovnik. And these people had decided, their family decided they could never go back to that apartment, and therefore they wanted to sell it. And I said to them, look, I know you're decent people. I know that you understand that you probably won't be doing a lot of traveling to Dubrovnik for quite a long time, if ever again. But this is a distress sale. Don't sell whilst you're in distress. You're not that much in need of the money. And they said, no, we want to be rid of it. We don't want anything to do with Dubrovnik. We don't want anything to do with Croatia. We are strangers now in that land. I said, please, for goodness sakes, wait, think. And if I can quote one of my friends who is retired but was a grief counsellor, the thing he used to tell people who were mourning for a loved one who had passed was, make no important life decisions for 1 or 2 years after the passing of your partner. You're really not in a fit state to do it. These people were making really life-changing decisions, and they went ahead with it, and because I refused to sell to them, and they thought of me as a decent person who would not cheat them, they sold to other people who were much less decent. And of course, within 3 years, that apartment was worth an extraordinary sum compared to what they got for it immediately after the war. So distress sales, very much a low in the post-war situation, but very much part of the post-war situation. Now the next thing, I said you can't fix the people. What happens post-war is that the internationals who were there during the war become lost in a sea of new internationals who are all moving in because they all have some humanitarian or development project that they want to get going and get doing, and they want to start mending things. And they mend things, they talk about mending people, but they never do. They just mend things. Now, one of the things I've come to notice now in post-conflict situations, a conflict in some ways becomes a status quo. You get used to living in the conflict. The people in Ukraine now, in certain cities, are used to living under shell fire. They hate it, it's horrible, it's dreadful, they don't want it, but they become used to it. They acclimatise to it, and somehow each day they learn to get up and survive. So when the war stops, you have a paradigm change, and it's changed from horrible to much better. When you have a paradigm change in human systems, you have about 100 days when everything is still in flux, and where if you do the right things, you can actually change the people. You can change their expectations, you can change their habits, you can get them to change their behavior. But because the people who flood in the international community want to change things, and they set up committees and all sorts of money financial institutions which take up the first 100 days, what happens then after that is that the adaptation of the ordinary people is to, how do I milk all this money coming in? Instead of using that 100 days to change perceptions, to say, right, where you were a mixed community before, everybody must return to their mixed neighborhood. The only people who will not return are people with blood on their hands. They will not return, but they should be being looked after by the justice system anyway. I'm not going to get onto the justice system for the former Yugoslavia, which was very expensive and very, very inefficient. So, the paradigm change after 100 days. The highs are all about having water running, about having trams running. The lows are all about people. People's behavior, people who are scared and make distress sales, people who come to help and they say, hello, I'm from headquarters, I'm here to help. Yeah, right. They're not getting the right thing to fix. You have to fix social systems, and the time to do that is when the paradigm is in flux, when the new paradigm hasn't been resettled, because it never goes back to the pre-war paradigm. And sometimes nobody wants it to go back to the pre-war paradigm. So, life in post-war Sarajevo, bittersweet. Highs and lows, lots of things fixed, very few people fixed. And that's really all I have to say about that.